This is the nature of things. It is a scary world out there, and our deepest fears are excellent inspiration for horror films. Zombie mind control, no matter how schlocky, never fails to disturb us.
The virus or whatever is supposed to be the cause of the zombie takes over our brains and we lose our identity, and that's very scary.
The good news is these are not real zombies. The bad news is parasitic mind control is very real.
She can be infected by a parasitic fungus and eventually change her behavior.
Brain-manipulating parasites are playing head games with everything from industrious ants right up to, well, us.
Do humans need to worry about parasites that manipulate their behavior? Absolutely.
For most of us, a parasite is something that causes stomach grief after an exotic holiday. But to biologists, parasites are among the world's most successful and sophisticated organisms. Tiny parasites control and manipulate bigger species, even humans, and we're only just beginning to understand how they do that. This common backyard caterpillar may look perfectly healthy on the outside. But on the inside, a mind-altering parasite is bending the caterpillar to its will. Dr. Shelley Adamo is a parasitologist who studies mind manipulation in caterpillars. Her critters are bright blue instead of green because of their diet of lab food.
So this is the tobacco hornworm caterpillar, and he does what all caterpillars like to do. He eats, and he'll eat 24 hours a day. So these are eating machines. It is their behavior that they do virtually all the time. They need to bulk up to be a successful adult. Now, unfortunately for the caterpillar, they have a number of enemies. One of them is a parasitic wasp. The parasitic wasp comes in, the female does, and she stings this caterpillar.
But this wasp is not injecting venom into the caterpillar. It's using its stinger to stab through the thick skin and deliver its eggs directly into the body of the host. This caterpillar is now the surrogate mother for over 100 wasp larvae.
The eggs hatch out, and the little larvae live inside, the wasp babies basically, develop inside the body of this caterpillar. And what they do is they don't eat the body of the caterpillar, all they do is they drink the blood. When you think about it, it's not a bad idea. Here you've got all these lovely resources, and so if you just lay your eggs out on a plant, the eggs are not protected, and then the eggs have to, your own larvae have to go out and try to find their own food. Here you've got protection and food in one easy package.
2 weeks later, once the larvae are about the size of a grain of rice, their next life stage begins.
Now, this caterpillar is about to have these wasps emerge, and what they're going to start doing very soon, if they haven't already, is they're going to use their mouth parts and they're going to start scraping. They also have in their saliva an enzyme to help dissolve the body wall. And so right now, I suspect this very moment, they're secreting that enzyme. They've got a little tooth, and they're using it to rasp away to dig that hole. So this is, you can see, it's not a very lively caterpillar because that's what's happening inside this caterpillar right at this moment. And we're going to see those wasps come out probably in the next few hours.
As predicted and right on schedule, wasp larvae, one after another, slowly squeeze out of this live host.
When you see these wasp larvae wiggling out of their host, it just looks so disgusting. But you have to appreciate, first of all, this is, of course, how the wasps make their living, but also it's just a marvel of evolution. When you think about how these two species have coexisted for a very, very long time, and the wasps have learned tricks on how to exploit the physiology of its host to its own advantage. And that is amazing and a wonderful example of how animals can co-evolve.
The larvae quickly get to work and spin a cocoon. But why doesn't the caterpillar devour these squirming larvae right off its back? Well, the truth is, it can't.
Somehow, these wasps, while living inside the caterpillar, have managed to hijack some of the regulatory mechanisms inside that caterpillar to turn off feeding. They've basically managed to manipulate the brain of the caterpillar so that it no longer eats. And that's very impressive because that is the major behavior of this animal.
But there's even more brain manipulation going on.
It's been transformed by the wasps into a wasp protector, a wasp bodyguard. And what it's going to do, this caterpillar is going to whip around and protect those wasps from anything that's going to come and potentially damage those wasp cocoons. So the caterpillar has now really become a zombie bodyguard. Its whole existence now revolves around protecting those parasites that are now sitting on its back.
The tiny wasp larvae have hijacked the caterpillar's brain. They are now in control.
This wasp knows something we don't, which is the wasp knows how to get in there and change the functioning of this little brain to shut off its major behavior. And we would like to know what it's doing because it appears to be using mechanisms that we haven't exploited yet in our search to understand how to change brains.
As the adult parasitic wasps emerge from their cocoons and leave behind their dying host, Professor Adamo suggests that we get over the ick factor and look around. We are surrounded by brain-snatching parasites. Take this psychedelic snail. Not only is a parasite causing its tentacles to flash madly, it's manipulating this snail to move out into the open, making it easy pickings for a predator. And this grasshopper is being driven by a parasitic hairworm to commit suicide by drowning. Just so the hairworm can live on in the watery depths. Kevin Lafferty, an ecologist with the United States Geological Survey, has a rough life. This pristine piece of California coast is more than a surfer's paradise. It's his lab. And it's here that he discovered what's lurking just beneath the surface for so many creatures.
I thought I knew everything about the fishes and the invertebrates that I was studying, and then I realized they were full of parasites inside that I hadn't been told about. I didn't know what they were doing, and that's what I wanted to study.
And now it seems, wherever he goes, he's surrounded by parasites.
It seems bizarre to us that parasites would manipulate host behavior, like science fiction. But even on my favorite surfing beach, we find the most common crab. There's parasites inside here that manipulate its behavior.
And as it turns out, there are lots more where that one came from.
So far, we've accumulated hundreds of examples of parasites that manipulate host behavior. We have a lot less understanding about how they manipulate behavior. That's a much more difficult question to answer, and that's where a lot of the new tools and modern technology in biology is going to help us make progress there. The easy part is documenting whether or not it occurs. The hard part is figuring out how important it is on a bigger scale. Is it just a cocktail party anecdote, or is this really an important part of nature?
Professor Lafferty uncovered an important clue to the role parasites may be playing in the wild one night while looking at the brain of a killifish.
Wow.
What he saw shocked him. Hundreds and hundreds of parasitic flatworms.
When I first saw parasites on the brain of a fish, I was blown away. I was like, wow, okay, this is something I gotta figure out.
And this little flatworm doesn't limit itself to just living on a fish brain. It's concocted one of the most elaborate species-hopping journeys you'll ever hear about. It all starts here in the mud, where a flatworm waits to hop on board a snail. Once inside, it consumes the snail's sex organs, getting all the energy it needs to grow up big and strong. Next, the flatworm takes to the water, and that's where it catches its next free ride, with a California killifish. The flatworms enter through the gills, then attack the fish's brain, absolutely covering it with cysts. To find out just what the parasite is doing to the infected killyfish's brain, Professor Lafferty has assembled his research students.
It's going to be a very simple experiment. We're going to put infected and uninfected killifish in. What we're hoping will happen is birds will come in and feed on the fish, and we'll be able to tell which types of fish the birds prefer, infected or uninfected. The nets are set up. We've got the fish, half of them are infected, half are uninfected. And so the idea is we'll put them in, we'll see which ones the birds eat. I'm going to let you do the honors of tossing them in there, okay?
Professor Lafferty believes that the parasites are altering the fish's behavior by making them easy pickings for the birds. Could the parasites be looking for yet another host? As the birds start to go after the trapped fish, Lafferty watches and waits.
We've got to bring in the first seine. That'll capture the fish.
After 10 days, it's time to bring in the nets and see which fish have survived the bird's steady predation.
Now just block it off. Okay, great. Good. Okay, excellent. Yeah, plenty of fish. All right, well, let's try and get these guys in the bucket. It looks like we did pretty well here. These are the fish that are left. These are the fish that the birds didn't want to eat for whatever reason. And we're going to bring these back to the lab and find out, are they parasitized or not?
Back in the lab, the brains of the surviving killifish are dissected. And it doesn't take long to pick up the pattern. The fish that survived were the ones with no parasites on the brain.
When we pulled the nets in, what we found was that almost all the infected fish had been eaten by birds. And what that told us was that being infected made a fish 10 to 30 times more likely to be eaten by a bird. The parasite was doing a much better job at manipulating the fish than we had even imagined it could.
But why is this parasite going to all this trouble?
Good haul. We got a bunch. So when the parasites coat the surface of this fish's brain, they seem to alter the neuromodulators, and that changes the fish's behavior. The fish is perfectly healthy. It does all the things that a normal fish could do, except that it does certain things more frequently, like roll over on its side and flash this really bright belly up to the surface. And that catches
the attention of birds, which then come down and are more likely to feed on infected fishes than uninfected fish.
And getting inside a bird has been the flatworm's endgame all along. It's the one place they can reproduce. Then they send their eggs out with the bird's feces to start the cycle all over again. But how does a flatworm override a brain that has been evolutionarily programmed to avoid all predators?
So it's been a mystery to us how the parasite is able to do this. But we think that there's at least two things that it does. First, it gets to the brain. Now it's in the driver's seat of that fish. It's able to really be in a location where it can mess with the fish's behavior. And then by looking at the chemistry of the brain in infected fishes, what we see is there's a big change in serotonin. And one of the outcomes of that is infected fish are a lot more relaxed. They respond a lot less when a bird, for instance, might be chasing them around the marsh. And they need to be able to respond with fear and to flee that bird if they see it coming. If the fish is too relaxed and it's just, not paying much attention, then it's much more likely to be eaten and successfully predated by the bird.
First, inside a snail in the mud, then a fish, and finally using that fish to get inside a bird. These flatworms really do get around. But who wins in this complex and intricate dance?
The snail is a loser. It gets castrated. That's not good. The fish is a loser. It gets eaten by a bird because its behavior's been manipulated. The parasite's a winner. It gets dispersed from estuary to estuary. That's an important thing if the estuary might dry up, for instance. And the bird is probably a winner too because it gets sort of this delivery service from the parasite in terms of easier fish to catch. And so all those hosts provide different things to the parasite, and it has an advantage then for having multiple hosts in its life cycle instead of just going from bird to bird.
Professor Lafferty is clearly fascinated by these ingenious little parasites. So why can't they get any respect from the rest of us?
Because we have this antagonistic relationship with parasites when we're infected, I think we always have this tendency to look at parasites with disdain. But in fact, parasites make up about half or maybe more than half the species on Earth. And they're every bit as natural as lions and sharks. And that suggests to us that parasites are playing really important roles in that ecosystem and probably in all ecosystems.
So researchers are hunting for brain snatchers and their zombie victims. This isn't just an ant colony to Penn State entomologist David Hughes. It's a co-evolutionary battlefield.
Ants are the dominant insects on the planet, in some cases the dominant life. And it's not surprising, therefore, that a lot of other organisms wanted to have part of that, want a free lunch, and these are the parasites.
It's his knack for putting the science in science fiction that brought Hollywood calling on David Hughes.
Does it live in a jungle?
No.
Hey!
We're involved with Paramount Pictures that are doing World War Z, the Brad Pitt movie, very popular, trying to understand if there were zombies, how would they evolve? How would that play into the parasitic hordes that we see among these zombies?
I'm scared.
How do we know they're coming?
They're coming. However, this is Professor Hughes's day job, looking for ants in a Brazilian rainforest. Not just any ants, mind you, zombie ants who've been turned against their own queen and colony.
Ants are really the driving force of tropical rainforests. If you were to weigh all of the organisms, including the mammals, on one side of the scale, and you have to weigh the ants on the other side of the scale, you'd find that the ants outweigh every other form of life inside the forest, apart from the trees, of course.
A colony of thousands of ants is considered to be a superorganism, a creature unto itself, where the actions of each individual are coordinated to defend the colony fortress against attack.
We have the major division, which is between the queen, who lays the eggs and reproduces, and all of her daughters. And these are all the workers. And they never get a chance to reproduce. They help the colony by gathering food, protecting the colony, defending it against threats. So we have a very finely orchestrated division of labour, a little bit like an assembly plant of a car manufacturing plant. And each individual has a particular job to do. And together, collectively, they have a great efficiency. The problem, of course, is that they need food. They need to go out into the forest to collect that food.
And that's when the ants expose their colony to its biggest threat. Simple spores from a fungus raining down from above. But this ain't no shiitake mushroom. This is a highly evolved parasite.
But the decision to go out and forage is also a decision to go through large numbers of spores and consequently get hit by that.
The spore is a near-perfect weapon, evolved to penetrate the ant's exoskeleton.
And once inside of the ant, they reproduce over many days, maybe as long as a week, maybe 10 days, and then they're able to control the ant.
The infected ant stops working. It goes AWOL and then deserts its colony. Altogether, very un-ant-like behavior. Although the ant is being devoured on the inside, the growing fungus keeps it alive and mobile enough to climb up a nearby plant. It moves to the underside of a leaf, bites hard into a leaf vein, and then dies. But the parasite isn't done with it quite yet. The fungus grows out of the ant, taking the shape of a long stalk. But this is no gaudy decoration. It's a weapon.
What you're looking at now is the underside of a leaf, and attached to which is a dead ant. And inside the body of this ant is all fungal tissue. And from the back of its head, its neck, is a long stalk growing outwards. And just halfway down that stalk, you can see a small little ball. Looks a little bit like a soccer ball. And that's where the spores are going to be produced. They're going to shoot out during the cool of the evening, and they're going to rain down onto the trail below. And this is how the fungus is reproducing itself.
Somehow, with no brain, no nervous system, or even a body, this fungus can brainwash and direct the movements of an ant. This mind control is achieved by the synthesis of complex chemicals, something that fungi do very well.
The fungi which infect and control ant behavior come from a larger group of fungi from which we get some really cool chemicals such as LSD. LSD comes from this group of fungi, in that case infecting plants. They produce what's called ergots, alkaloids, which really have an effect on mammalian nervous systems.
Professor Hughes and his research students want to see how sophisticated this parasite really is. Does it target a specific location to set up its ambush?
What we're trying to do is reduce all of the complexity of having a forest with so many leaves. And so in order to make some sense of it, we have to make a map. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to measure the positions of the ants that we can find around the nest. There's a nest just over here that we found. And so by making this 9 square meter area, we check under every single leaf between ground level and about 2 meters off the ground. And we look for these ants which have been manipulated to die on the leaf. And we record the positions of them, the height and the orientation. And then we can relate them to one another.
Once a zombie ant has been located, it's marked with a red flag. And a forensic photo is taken. To the untrained eye, this looks quite random, but Professor Hughes suspects there is a pattern here. He now knows the location of the dead zombie ants, but not the main ant trail.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in this area, and maybe the trail is going that way.
Professor Hughes has a hunch. so he plants yellow flags along what he thinks is the main ant trail.
Pardon?
Since the ants are nocturnal, Professor Hughes returns in the dead of the night to see if he's right.
And so using these infrared cameras and a source of infrared light, we're able to see the world as the ant sees it on the forest floor at nighttime. This is a great advance because it allows us to capture the natural behavior of the colony as they go about their nightly routine. And then we're ready to turn them on. Yep. You turn them on, Raquel, please. Okay, then we're set up. Hopefully the ants come out tonight. Good. Let's go.
Bingo! This is indeed the main trail leading to and from the ant colony, taking them right through the zombie ants' ambush.
So essentially what we're looking at here from the colony over there out across this trail is a sniper's alley for these ants, which are moving out to get food. They have to go out to get food, and along the way they're getting hit by not bullets but spores.
The secret to this fungal parasite's success is that it somehow directs the zombie ants to specifically attack the main ant trail.
The behavior is so beautifully controlled and it seems so orchestrated, but it's after all, it's just a fungus, a microorganism. No central nervous system, no brain, but it still manages to control the ant to go in a pretty good location, a location that increases the chances that the spores, which are shot out from that big ball onto the floor, can hit other ants. It has to be precise.
Back from the ant colony in the Brazilian rainforest to the busy campus at Penn State, Professor Hughes adds to his zombie ant collection and takes a moment to reflect on the disturbing reality of parasitic mind control.
This zombie ant phenomenon really does get us. This idea of mind manipulation or body snatchers really upsets people in some visceral way. Here we are in a museum at nighttime with dusty drawers and dead animals and lots of shadows. And we might think something is around corners and we could go and search for that. And maybe we find it, maybe we don't. But the whole problem is that something's inside you. Something, a parasite, which is taking over your behavior. And really, behavior is the essential thing about us. It's our character. It's our being. And if something were to stop that, well, then we'd stop being who we are. And that's probably the reason we don't like it.
Are these rats under an evil spell? They say that in London, wherever you are, you're never more than a few meters away from a rat. And every hour, the rat population grows by several thousand. But these rats skulking around may be under the insidious spell of a tiny parasite they pick up from ingesting contaminated soil. Professor Joanne Webster studies a single-celled parasite that she believes has the ability to influence the mind and behavior of rats.
Toxoplasma is such an interesting parasite, primarily because it does seem to be quite unique in that a parasite that seems to explicitly manipulate, alter the host behavior for its own selective benefit. Lots of parasites change behavior in their host, but this one seems to be very, very subtly changing the behavior of its host for its own selective benefit.
This parasite loves its rodent hosts. There's no better way to get spread around town. Until recently, parasitologists believed that the mammalian brain was far too complex to be manipulated by such a seemingly simple organism.
If you put an infected rat and let it run about, there's no obvious differences, and this is why for so many years this parasite was taken as asymptomatic. And indeed, from rat to rat, the fact they have equal mating success, equal positions in the dominance hierarchy, it's not clear from rat to rat what's different. However, what you will see if it subtly changes is this increased activity. They're more active than their uninfected counterparts, and they appear to be also more exploratory, more risk-taking than their uninfected counterparts.
To try to prove that these otherwise normal-looking lab rats are being manipulated by a parasite, Professor Webster and her PhD student, Maya Kaushik, have designed a simple but ingenious experiment. They've created an elevated catwalk, or should we say rat walk, with bisecting pathways. One is walled in, a familiar kind of route for a rat, while the other is a totally exposed runway, which normal rats would avoid.
Rats are the most neophobic mammals known to man. That is, that they have the ability to detect and will subsequently avoid any subtle novelty in their environment, and this is what makes them so difficult to control through trapping and poisoning regimes. It's a very strong innate behavior.
The parasite-free rat advances tentatively along the enclosed section. It has no interest in walking the plank into the unknown, a reliable strategy for avoiding a cat. However, when a rat infected with the Toxoplasma parasite drops in, it's a totally different story. This is not what rats do. That is, unless they are being controlled by a parasite.
Whereas an uninfected may hide away in the dark, hiding away, you'll get the infected ones quite bravely and boldly going out to big exposed areas. Again, all behavioral traits likely to increase their chance of being predated by the cat.
From its prime location on the rat's brain, the parasite is in the driver's seat, steering the rat out into the open and perhaps toward the waiting paws of a cat. But surely these infected rats wouldn't roam so freely if they detected the scent of a cat, or would they?
This then took us to the next stage. We thought, if this parasite can override such a strong innate behavior, what about responses to cats and cat urine?
Apparently nothing in the rodent world screams danger louder than cat urine. The entire experiment takes place within the wood chip confines of this box.
In one nest box is a little bit of bedding from the rat's own nest box, so it's very homely, smells, you know, like home, that they want to go. Another bit, there's a nest box with a few drops of water, so a neutral smell. In another corner, there's a nest box with a few drops of rabbit urine. So in this sense, we're controlling for any response to smells in general, because this rabbit urine represents a smell of another mammal, but that of a non-predatory mammal. And in one area, you have a nest box containing a few drops of the cat urine, representing the potential feline predatory risk.
This nest box with the cat urine is the one corner that a rat should steer clear of. However, when an infected rat is introduced, it's a much different story.
What we were surprised to see is infected rats, it didn't simply dampen down this fear. Particularly in the most active rats, they showed a significant attraction. They spent more time in the areas of cat presence than they did in the others. And this is why we called it the fatal feline attraction.
You heard that right. Fatal feline attraction. Not only have the rats lost their innate sense of fear toward their greatest adversary, they're sexually attracted to them.
You think if something as simple as a single-celled organism can alter behavior so specifically, in many ways more sophisticatedly than a neurophysiologist, a neuroscientist can do, that has a great appeal. How do they do it? What can it tell us about how our brain and behavior works?
And when it comes to our brain, is it possible that a parasite like Toxoplasma could manipulate our behavior?
I think it's very plausible, highly likely, that we'll see these same very subtle changes in behaviour that we see in the rat and mouse across the whole spectrum of secondary hosts, right up until humans. This parasite is sophisticated, but it's not only going to express its behaviour in a rat or a mouse. The same behavioural changes are likely to be expressed in an infected human.
Humans controlled by parasites. Could it happen? For these Prague's zombie wannabes, it's a cold and dreary afternoon of the living dead. But it will take more than a little rain to stop this swarm. At nearby Charles University, this professor is not a part of the zombie festivities. However, he believes his mind is not his own, and that his personality has been altered, his brain manipulated by Toxoplasma, the same parasite that controls rats. 20 years ago, evolutionary biologist Jaroslav Fleger was tested for Toxoplasma. He gave a blood sample and waited for his results.
Within 2 days, I realized that I am Toxoplasma infected. So it was interesting. I was not very happy about this. But in the same time, I realized that my Toxoplasma positivity could explain some interesting, some interesting traits in my own behavior. Because I am usually not too much afraid in situation when I should be afraid. For example, on some field expedition in Turkey, in eastern Turkey, there was some gunfire, a lot of gunfire there in the night. And everybody else were afraid, not me. I was quite quiet.
Toxoplasmosis in humans is incredibly common. 1/3 to 1/2 of all adults are infected. We get it from undercooked meat and from kitty litter boxes. Professor Fleger was curious. Could Toxoplasma be influencing the personalities of other people too? So he gathered his students, both infected and uninfected, and got them to complete standard personality tests. The results were striking.
Toxoplasma infected men have different properties, psychological properties, than uninfected men. And also infected women have also different personality profile than uninfected women.
Not only that, Professor Fleger discovered that infected individuals have slower reflexes and got in 2.5 times more traffic accidents. At first, Fleger's controversial results were dismissed by the scientific community. It had always been accepted that Toxoplasma was mostly a benign parasite. But back in California, Professor Kevin Lafferty had a very different reaction. Lafferty understood the power of brain-snatching parasites, and so he jumped right into Fleger's research.
One of the most interesting things about his results is that men and women tend to respond differently to infection. For instance, men seem to have a lower IQ if they're infected, and women have the opposite, a higher IQ if they're infected. And so, if it says anything, perhaps it indicates that men and women's brains react differently to a particular type of neuromodulation by this parasite.
And this all makes perfect sense to Lafferty.
Well, we've got this parasite that manipulates mouse behavior to get the mouse into a cat, but that same parasite ends up in our brains. It's in our brains. It doesn't know that it's not in a mouse, but it tries hard to do the same thing that it would do to a mouse, and therefore it ends up manipulating our behavior.
Professor Lafferty wondered if Toxoplasma is affecting so many individuals, What might this mean for their societies? He focused on correlating two separate pools of information. Countries all over the world keep medical records of Toxoplasma infection rates among pregnant women, since infection can be extremely dangerous to a developing fetus. Dr. Lafferty then cross-referenced this with national personality profiles across different countries.
We see that populations that have high levels of Toxoplasma tend to be, on average, more neurotic than populations that have low levels of Toxoplasma. And a good example is risk aversion. So more neurotic cultures tend to be less risk averse. They establish stronger governments, more authoritarian governments, things like that.
It's hard to believe that a single-celled microorganism might be shaping not only an individual's personality, but entire societies.
There's obviously lots of things that affect culture, history, and geography. When we do the analysis that looks at how much Toxoplasma explains, it amounts to about 30%. That's a lot of the variation that's explainable by a biological phenomenon like this parasite Toxoplasma.
This radical theory suggests that a parasite is defining who we are individually and culturally. And there may not be much we can do about it.
After I published the work on Toxoplasma, I decided to get tested out of curiosity. I was not infected, it turns out, even though I had cats as pets growing up. But if you did find out that you were infected, it raises an interesting question, which is, now you found out that you're sharing your personality with a parasite. Is that something you'd want to change? Are you happy with your shared personality, or would you want your old personality back? It's sort of a hypothetical because we can't really treat infections with Toxoplasma, but I think it opens up this broader question of, as hosts, in many cases, we're sharing our personality with parasites. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, or can we just live with it?
If literally billions of us may be infected with mind-altering parasites, is there anything we can learn from our brain snatchers? Dalhousie University's Dr. Shelley Adamo thinks there is.
Parasites are really nature's neurobiologists, and we're running out of drugs in the pipeline to treat, say, mental disorders like depression. And so it's probably time to start looking outside the box, as they say, into different places where we might be able to find chemicals that have activity on the brain. And one place to look would be parasites that are able to secrete such things. So I don't think as humans we should be too proud to look to parasites for some instruction.
As it turns out, the mind-manipulating zombie apocalypse doesn't really look like this. Much more like this, at least for now. We like to believe we're in control, but if what we're discovering about the rest of the animal kingdom is anything to go by, who's really in control is a lot more complicated and interesting than we ever imagined.